Less than 5 months away from the mother of all electoral battles, election 2019, is the latest offering from Dr. Shashi Tharoor, the paradoxical Prime Minister. His 18th book talks about the man Narendra Modi. Thank you very much for speaking to us. 18 books, and at some point of time in this discussion, I'm going to ask you, where do you find the time to write them?
At night. And sometimes on planes. But
4.5 years in the tenure of this government, I think less than 5 months away from general elections, you are questioning if he is a paradoxical Prime Minister, in fact stating that he's one. If I may go back to 2014, and one of the big controversies that you led yourself very willingly into was, is he Modi 2.0? What changed from then to now?
So I started off being willing to give him the benefit of the doubt for two reasons. First, his own statements at the end of the campaign and immediately after being elected. He said a lot of very inclusive and conciliatory things, talked about Sabka Saath, Sabka Vikas, talked about being Prime Minister for all Indians, inclusiveness and so on. And in the same article where I said, is there a Modi 2.0, I also said it's too soon to tell. That bit got left out in all the controversial potted paraphrases of what I had written. But the second reason I wanted to say that was because I felt one owed a debt of respect, a duty of respect to the electorate for the choice they had made. And you know, as a Democrat, you respect your citizens' choices. And I said, they have voted for him. Let's give him the benefit of the doubt, but let's see if we can measure him according to the yardstick that he has himself provided by saying all these inclusive things. Then within 6 months, Supriya, I had written the introductory essay to my collection of essays, India Shastra. And I had said in that, that I was already disenchanted, saying that there was this extraordinary contradiction at the heart of the whole Modi enterprise, that he says all these liberal things, but he rests for political support on the most illiberal elements in Indian society. And that is there in black and white in a book published in December 2014, 6 months after he came to power. So I begin this book with the words, I told you so, because I argued that that contradiction provided the seeds of what would be Modi's future failure if he carried on like that. And he has spent 4.5 years living up to my worst fears.
So in some sense, you say your worst fears came true, and in some sense, then it is a narrative that you thought you had started 6 months into this government coming into office. But do you run the risk, and I'm going to get into the substantial parts of the book, but do you run the risk of further fanning the Modi mania by bringing out a book on him less than 5 months before elections? People will say this is also going to add on to the Modi mania that...
Well, not for those who read the book, because they'll realize that it's a very substantive and substantiated takedown of the man and what he has done to India in the last 4.5 years. There's, you know, the first 86 pages of the book are a profile of the individual, his beliefs, the kind of Moditva that has been created, which is Hindutva plus the Modi personality cult, and an assessment of where that's leading the country. And then each section after that, the first one, called the Modification of India, is about the changes in the thinking about the idea of Indian nationalism and India, the idea of India. There's a section on governance and government. There's a section on economics and the disasters of Modinomics. And finally, a section on foreign policy. So we've gone through, case by case, as it were, with hundreds of footnotes and detailed research and lots of data, a very, very substantial argument. It's not just a casual sort of election campaign rhetoric kind of manifesto. It is a substantive book by somebody who's also concerned about its credibility as a commentator. So it's obviously a book that would outlast, I hope, the immediate exigencies of today's politics. And I believe that, that anybody who reads it will see that the disappointment with Mr. Modi is one that many who have otherwise been enchanted by him in 2013 and 14 should themselves feel once they read all the facts and figures here.
I will, you know, I'm just going to turn focus and talk to you about the substantive parts, and I will begin with one of the things that you say in your book, and that really leads us to the point about this whole illiberal democracy, illiberal leader. Isn't this a reflection of what people want eventually? And as a commentator, are you disregarding that perhaps Mr. Modi's manifestation, perhaps the paradox that exists, is perhaps a reflection of what people want? People seem to want world over, and India is not an exception, these very decisive, seemingly strong leaders. And Mr. Modi perhaps...
That's precisely the message that the BJP would like us to get, right? So you tell me, how many people actually wanted to see their freedoms abridged? How many people wanted to see the money they had assiduously saved in biscuit tins in their kitchen suddenly becoming rendered worthless at 3 hours' notice? How many people wanted to see the CBI director and deputy director unceremoniously turfed from their posts? How many people wanted to see 4 Supreme Court judges decrying the dangers to democracy? How many people wanted to see RTI applications piling up literally in the millions with no responses coming from the government? How many people have wanted the things that Mr. Modi has done? I think when you really ask them, you actually don't see the benefit of any decisive leadership. You see nothing but one setback after another to the institutions of Indian democracy and the effectiveness of Indian democracy. I genuinely believe that nobody wants to see their freedoms abridged. Everybody in a democracy wants to enjoy their autonomy. The problem is when you have a government that tells you you've got to link your Aadhaar number to your mobile phone so we can snoop in on you more easily, that your bank accounts and your mobile phone will both be linked to your Aadhaar and we will have custody of it. All of these things are abridgments of freedom. And they're Mr. Modi's government that have done it. It wasn't part of the original design of the Aadhaar scheme by the Congress party. So you're looking at some very serious threats to the freedom, autonomy, security, privacy of the Indian people, which so far have been kept at bay only by the Supreme Court and the opposition. So I would be very surprised if thoughtful Indians, having gone through these points, would agree with you that they'd prefer to see all of their freedoms abridged in the name of decisive leadership.
Maybe thoughtful people wouldn't, but there is a large section that agrees with what's happening, and which is why one is going to wait and watch what 2019 will do. Will this section that believes it is right to do so succeed, or the section that believes this is wrong? But I will go to the news point, and I think it's only fair that we talk about institutional autonomy, because you mentioned CBI yourself. What we are seeing is unprecedented. We are seeing the number 1 and number 2 CBI openly spar. The credibility of the institution is in tatters. People are willing to now question, should CBI exist in its present form? But the reality also is that when you have an institution like that at war within itself, why is the government being criticized to take what seems, once again, quote unquote, a decisive action? You know there's something that's rotting within, you move in. You get in an interim chief, and of course the court order notwithstanding right now, what more could the government have done or not done?
Well, first of all, the government should not have brought the matter to such a pretty pass. I mean, why appoint a special director, a post that has never been heard of before, other than for the fact that the individual concerned was close to Narendra Modi when he was Chief Minister of Gujarat? Why append an existing structure of an organization that was by and large respected across the political spectrum? You tell me, which court and which state government will today want to refer a case to a CBI in such disarray?
But that's my point. CBI was the last point of refuge, and today it's become an object of an institution.
And who has brought it to this pass? This government has. By creating this sort of imperium within the imperio, by creating the second locus of power, with proximity to the Prime Minister and his minions, and this person then proceeding, apparently, to undermine the duly appointed head of the agency, what kind of future were we giving the CBI anyway? So the fact that it's imploded right now is disgraceful, but whose fault is it? Very clearly that of the government that has created the situation in the first place.
Dr. Tharoor, I agree with large parts of what you're saying, that this could have been nipped in the bud. Matters didn't need to come to this extent. But as far as the functional autonomy of CBI is concerned, and I think the Congress party also has questions to answer, the CBI has always been used for political vendetta, and this government is perhaps not doing anything different than what the previous governments have. Will you be candid enough to say, am I right?
Look, you may well be right up to a point, but in the last 70 years, have you ever seen anything like the unseemly drama that's unfolding before the nation today? The answer very clearly is no. We didn't do foolish things like bringing in a second center of power responsible directly to the Prime Minister. We didn't do things involving trying to nip certain investigations in the bud because they might have embarrassed the government. That kind of thing didn't happen. I think what has been said of the CBI in the past, under various governments of all parties, is that there has been a tendency to urge the CBI to go slow on certain investigations when they were politically useful to go slow, and to turn up the heat when it was politically useful to do so. And those kinds of things are at least within the law. I mean, you know, obviously justice was either delayed in the former case or accelerated in the latter case. But it was still justice. There was a substantive case, substantive investigation, and action being taken or not taken. Now, that may be bad enough. But what we're seeing today is something that's truly shocking. And we've never seen an equivalent of that in any era. Congress, United Front, BJP, NDA, 1, nothing.
So you were right in raising the point up until the juncture where the Supreme Court has stepped in. Do you now believe, as a responsible opposition member, it's time for the politicians to step back? Now the courts are going to monitor the probe. There is a Supreme Court justice who's been appointed. It's a time-bound procedure that's going to happen. Do you believe it's time now that the politicians take a backseat instead of adding more political fuel to the fire?
Look, I don't make that call. The party leadership will know what is best in terms of politics. But I think there is a perception on the part of the party leaders that while this process must certainly be supported, that we all are supporters of the Supreme Court, at the same time, the public must be made conscious of things like the extraordinary extent of the Rafale scam. We have found it an absolute mystery that the Indian media, which used to go to town on Bofors, an 84 crore scam, has not raised any issue about the Rafale, which not only is a scam perhaps 5,000 times larger in terms of the money at stake, but has actually threatened national security because an identified need of 128 planes, all to be assembled in India, was suddenly transformed into a buying order for 36 planes all to be made in France. And there are real questions as to why this was done when the needs of the Indian Air Force are publicly known after a very extensive and some would argue very painstaking process undertaken by the UPA government. And I think that if you have a scam that not only makes money for some cronies of the Prime Minister, but also threatens national security by reducing the effectiveness of our Air Force, this ought to be page one news every day, and it's not, which shows the extent to which this government has also successfully intimidated the media.
Well, the government tells you this is not intimidation of media, this is actually a manifestation of the fact that there is no scam. I'm just being the devil's advocate. As far as Rafale is concerned, I will take a quick question there and then move back to the book. The Rafale quote-unquote scam or the Rafale controversy is really stuck between two very polar views. One view that believes there is crony capitalism, 30,000 crore, like Rahul Gandhi says, has been put in the pocket of Mr. Anil Ambani, and the other view is that this is a very ill-informed narrative that is being peddled for political brownie points. The truth, I'm presuming, lies somewhere in between. But while we go in the pursuit of the truth, do we run the risk of not just maligning defense procurement, but actually risking no defense procurement happening? I mean, who in their right minds is now...
No, but that's precisely the question the Supreme Court has asked. Was the defense procurement process followed? You see, there was a 6-year process that culminated...
But the court has asked no other question other than that.
Yeah,
they have not questioned the...
So these are the questions we are asking. A 6-year process, following all the existing established norms and rules, decides that the Indian Air Force needs to replace 128 aircraft, decides that they'll be manufactured in parts in France and assembled by a public sector corporation in Bangalore. And the Indian Air Force agrees on the price that will be paid for this aircraft for this purpose. For 1 year, Mr. Modi does nothing after coming to power. Then he goes to Paris. And suddenly, it's no longer 120 aircraft, but 36. On what basis? What process? What analysis? No answer from the government. The price has suddenly tripled from 540 to 1640, and again, no explanation. They claim it's a state secret, but in fact, all prices of aircraft and weapon systems have been laid by previous defense ministers in Parliament in the past, so that's not a state secret. Then we find out that instead of assembling them in India, that assembly deal is off. The planes will all be made in France. Again, no explanation why. They will be given to us in a flyaway condition. And finally, in exchange for that, offset contracts in India will be signed with a company whose head accompanied the Prime Minister to Paris on that trip and whose company has never made a single plane in its existence. Now, these are all legitimate questions. I don't see what is ill-informed about these questions. These are basic questions to which the government has danced a little pirouette of refusing to answer. And I would have felt that our strong media, which is all too happy to latch on to the trivial and inconsequential, would have really tried to nail answers to this. I mean, I'm truly astonished on this matter.
The media has been found wanting, and I will not deny that. And I think there you justified. The media has been found wanting at least to raise a debate on this issue.
Exactly.
and get representations from both sides. On that, I agree with you. But you know, when you go after Rafale or when you go after CBI, and rightly so, like there are many who question we shouldn't do this, and I question them back saying, if you were in the opposition today, would you or would you not? You would obviously have made the same mountain of what you now call a molehill. My question really is that when you do all of this, are these going to be electoral issues. You're going into elections in Madhya Pradesh and Rajasthan and Chhattisgarh. Are these issues that are resonating on the ground? Do people in Madhya Pradesh care about a Rafale deal that was done, or do they care about the independence of the CBI?
I don't know, because the state assembly elections often tend to be about local issues. And, you know, for example, anti-incumbency against Vasundhara in Rajasthan may be greater than anti-incumbency against Modi in Delhi when it comes to a state assembly.
True, true.
But if you look, for example, at the Lok Sabha, clearly Rafale is going to be an issue in the Lok Sabha election because it affects the security of the nation. Clearly, when the Prime Minister said, "Na khaunga, na khane dunga," if all he meant was beef, then we need to address that too. The truth is that corruption is a very, very serious charge to be levied, and Rahul Gandhi has openly challenged the government to prove it has not been corrupt in explaining these bizarre decisions, which went at variance with a 6-year process that had been amply documented and had gone through all the relevant committees. This decision made spontaneously in Paris without any defense procurement process being followed.
No, but you know, one of the things that I want to say, I want to come back to the book, and you call him a paradoxical prime minister. All right, he promised a few things. He's pro-poor, pro-business, pro-big business at the same time, and that's the paradox. What are you? Many people will answer, it's all right. These are the many and more things that the prime minister is. What is the Congress party? Are you anti-business? Are you pro-business? Are you anti-reforms? Are you pro-reforms? Are you espousing soft Hindutva? Are you appeasing the minorities? In some sense, the paradox exists as much on the other side as well.
No, I disagree. I think, honestly, we've been very clear about what we stand for. We're very much pro-business and liberalization, but we believe that the fruits, the revenues of the profits they generate will be taxed and given to those who, frankly, are on the margins of our society. So we believe in welfareism. We're not ashamed of it. At the same time, we have said very clearly to the Indian public that we are the party of liberalization. We brought it in. So how can you accuse us of being anti-reform? On the contrary, Dr. Manmohan Singh has presided over the most reformist phase of Indian economic history. Secondly, you talk about soft Hindutva. We will completely reject that term. As Rahul Gandhi said, he rejects any kind of Hindutva, soft, hard, or medium. As far as we're concerned, many of us individually are Hindus or good Christians, Muslims, whatever we are. But we believe that Hindutva has nothing to do with our Hinduism. It is actually a political ideology that advocates a particular notion of Hindu Rashtra that is foreign to the Congress Party's idea of an inclusive India. We are wedded to the Constitution. They are not. We are wedded to a country in which everybody, irrespective of caste or religion or community, has equal stakes and equal rights.
And for
they
anybody
are not.
who has a doubt can go back to reading Why I Am a Hindu.
Absolutely. So soft Hindutva is simply not fair. No, I would argue that the paradoxes I pointed to in Modi are very special for him. For example, one of the most eloquent orators in the political history of India.
I was just going to come to that, yeah.
And here he is. He makes speeches at the drop of a hat and makes it with great mellifluous command of language.
Silent on.
Conspicuously silent when Dalits are flogged, when Muslims are lynched, when cow protection mobs run rampant. All of this suggests a willingness, at the very least, to condone some of the worst elements of our society who have felt empowered and emboldened by Mr. Modi's victory.
But you know, there's a question that was asked in the panel discussion yesterday, and many people are asking the question today. I think that's the beauty of our democracy. You ride a euphoria wave and then there is this disenchantment. There may be some amount of disillusionment with Mr. Modi, but it's not as if people are willing to look the other side. It's not as if people are extremely enthusiastic of what's happening on the other side, because people believe that the opposition itself is confused and in disarray. Am I not right?
No, I don't think you're right. I think the opposition is certainly a diverse opposition because, let's face it, we were decimated in 2014. So we don't have a gigantic shall we say, presence in Parliament to resist the encroachments on our democracy by the ruling party. But we believe that as far as the Congress is concerned, that our national footprint is not that of a 45, 48 seat party. It's a very, very large party with a presence in every corner of the country, including some places where the BJP is not. And we, I must say, are determined to translate that into a very effective opposition to Mr. Modi in the elections of 2019. Now, there are other parties in some states, we will all admit, some regional parties are stronger than even we are. And they too are opposed to Mr. Modi and what he's trying to do to the country. So in some cases, yes, the opposition will come across as diverse. And let's say in some states, a regional party versus the Congress might be the theme, because the BJP may not be a player in the south of the country, for example, or the east of the country. But nonetheless, what will happen is that at the end of the day, that's the parliamentary system at work, You will have all these parties coming together with numbers and figuring out the best combination that will form a government. We've seen it with NDA, we've seen it with the two UPA governments, we've seen it with the United Front government. That's the way the parliamentary system works. This is not about Mr. Modi versus anyone.
And what would you say to an electorate that's increasingly worried about that possibility? They believe, you know, this Khichdi coalition or the coalition that comes together, then there are these coalition pressures on you. We saw the big scams make headlines in UPA too, precisely for that reason. What would you say in defense to people?
I would say that some of the best and most successful developments in India have taken place under coalition governments. I would say that the UPA 1 presided over the single most impressive sustained period of growth in pulling people out of poverty, that Narasimha Rao's minority government gave us liberalization, and for that matter, that some of the initiatives taken by the minority government of Mr. Vajpayee, NDA 1, gave you the Golden Quadrilateral, gave you Sarva Siksha Abhiyan, and so on. So you've seen interesting and important and long-lasting initiatives taken by governments of coalitions, which were then continued by their successors.
You mentioned an important point in the paradox, which is dysfunctional economy. You say the rupee is falling, and you mention, you know, the banks are in a mess and all of that. If you speak to the other side on the NPA mess, all that they say is this is the legacy issue. That's what they inherited. They're in the middle of a cleanup. And also, would you not grant them the fact, and I'll come to I'll come to this follow-up in just a bit, would you not grant them the fact that they have made attempts to at least unravel the big reforms? GST was going to be a disaster, no matter who implemented this. Why
Absolutely not.
They've
Because
got
we had
an
a
IBC.
very, very clear perspective on GST. We had argued for a cap on the percentage, which would have prevented some of the evasion that we've seen in some of the disasters. Secondly, we had wanted time to prepare the public and shopkeepers and businesses for the process. We saw a botched implementation, which really paralyzed the economy in many large parts of it for a couple of years that need not have happened, because of the incompetence and haste with which GST was rolled out, the absurdity of the 5 rates, which have been a calamity and a recipe for tax evasion and fraud. Now it's finally settling down when the BJP has learned from its mistakes. But they are mistakes they need not have made if they'd listened to us.
There is a point in the book when you say that you were impressed also with some of the slogans that came to light, whether it was Make in India or whether it was Beti Bachao, Beti Padhao or Swachh Bharat. Isn't a good initiative best sold when it has a blitzkrieg narrative?
Yes,
At least
so
that narrative was there.
marketing has been the undoubted strength of this government. And unfortunately, it's come sometimes at the expense of substance. So we've got memorable slogans, you know, whether it's make in India, Start Up India, Stand Up India, Digital India, Sit Down India, is what has resulted from all of this, because there's been no real substantive accomplishment under any of those schemes. Swachh Bharat I had shown some sympathy for, but in that first year, the actual budget for Swachh Bharat was lower than the UPA's sanitation budget, whereas the publicity budget was 5 times the size of the UPA's last budget. Well, that's the kind of problem we have with this government. Everything is about appearances. It doesn't matter to this government if anything tangible is achieved. It must be seen to be achieved or be attempted to be achieved so they can sell it.
But isn't that the politics of the day? You have to be seen to be X and seen to be Y, but
you know, you tell me, if you're a young person in UP who voted for Mr. Modi because you were promised a job, and 5 years later you still don't have a job because he has really damaged the economy rather than helped it grow, why would you buy the same message again? I mean, you know, a salesman is as good as the package he sells, but if the people who bought the package once realize that it was empty inside, why would they buy the package a second time? But my question is to Mr. Modi and company, you can get away with marketing as a substitute for substance once. Can you get away with it a second time? I don't believe so. I think this government is going to come a cropper in 2019 because people know that they've been sold a bill of goods the first time.
So I will ask you one last question, and this has to, of course, do with 2019. It's a huge election. Mr. Modi is going to be a tough contender. The marketing on this side may be a little overdone, but the marketing on the other side is completely lacking. Are there no marketing budgets? Is there no marketing strategy? Because, you know, there seem to be these crests and troughs in narratives. You peak at a time and then there is this lull. You were on Rafale, you were setting the agenda. For 3 weeks, we saw absolute silence. Thanks to the CBI, you're back in the narrative now. I mean, isn't there going to be a sustained sort of a narrative that the Congress party would want to build?
Yeah, I mean, we are. And what's interesting for us, of course, is what does it take to get the media interested? It's not that we've been idle. Rahul Gandhi hasn't been sitting on his backside. He's been running around the country. In fact, in all 5 states, he's been present every single day. And when he's been in Delhi, it's always been linked to these 5 state elections. So my argument would be that there's been no let-up on the part of the Congress party, but certainly capturing media attention is difficult. It took the CBI for the media to pay attention to our concerns about Rafale. God knows what it'll take for the media to pay attention to the next thing. But our narrative is strong. I'll give you one example of something we haven't done before, which has been very interesting. All of us members of the Manifesto Committee are going around the country holding public consultations.
That's right.
With experts on various issues. Sometimes the consultations, at the wish of the participants, is behind closed doors because they're afraid of reprisals from the government. This government has unfortunately got a reputation for being very thin-skinned and hostile to people who speak. But many of the suggestions that have come up on many sectors that I have been discussing have been outstanding, useful ideas. Now, the process of public consultations also does some conscience raising. People are aware that these issues need to be addressed. They'll go into our manifesto. And eventually, when we come to power, because of all of the work that has been gone into it, the manifesto will serve as an effective guide for the respective ministers. This is the way in which we're going to work. Now, in the meantime, the media has chosen to stay away. Fine, it doesn't mean that we are inactive. We will continue being active. At least in the places where we speak and the people we reach out to, our effort of outreach will be known. At the end of the day, there are 543 constituencies where we have to actually reach out to the local people to get our message across. And that, in the end, may matter more than a marketing blitzkrieg.
Marketing. On that note, Dr. Tharoor, thank you very much for speaking to us. Pleasure.
Thanks, Supriya.